Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, the Food and Beverage Industry Roundtable, a year in review. My name is Pooja Nair. I'm a litigation partner at Irwin, Cohen & Jessup. I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You can use that to send questions at any time, and we will be doing a Q&A at the end. To start off the webinar, I want to introduce our moderator, Barbara Castiglia, from the executive editor of Modern Restaurant Management.
Thanks, Pooja. How severe has the COVID pandemic been for the food and beverage industry? Well, here's the latest. According to findings from a survey of 6,000 restaurant operators and 250 supply chain businesses in late November by the National Restaurant Association, 17% of restaurants, more than 110,000 establishments, are closed permanently or long-term. Of the 10,000 that have closed over the past 3 months, the majority had been in business for 16 years, with 16% in business for 30 years or more. These businesses were the fabric of our communities. Also, the survey found that 87% of full-service restaurants report an average 36% drop in sales revenue. 58% of chain and independent full-service operators expect continued furloughs and layoffs for the next 3 months. The industry lost 17,400 jobs in November, and it was the first month since April that they've lost jobs. This was according to the Department of Labor. Black Box Intelligence, which tracks all restaurant data, found that the industry's same-store traffic declined 16.3% in November. And this just trickles down from throughout the whole food service chain. So, this is where we are. I'd like to now introduce our panelists who will discuss this and see what's next, what we can hopefully look forward to. You already met Pooja. She is the head of Irwin, Cohen & Jessup's food, beverage, and hospitality practice group and a litigation partner there. She advises food and beverage clients on a comprehensive range of issues, including employment, trade secrets, partnership disputes, contract negotiations, and intellectual property. She's a graduate of Harvard Law School and the UC San Diego. Our next participant is Donald Snyder, CPA, a partner at Green, Hassett & Jenks. He has more than 30 years of experience in public accounting and chairs their quality control department. He provides audit, accounting, consulting services to clients in numerous industries, including restaurant, food and beverage, manufacturing, wholesale distribution, and technology. He leads their food and beverage practice, and he is a well-known business consultant in food distribution, food processing, and manufacturing. An industry speaker, he has a number of food and beverage networking groups, and he writes for their CPA Food Bites blog, and he's a co-author on their annual food and beverage white papers. Next is Robert Colway, who's the managing director at Focal Point Partners. He's been an investment banker for more than 30 years and initially worked at bulge bracket firms like Salomon Brothers, Merrill Lynch, and JP Morgan. For the last 12 years, he's focused on the middle market and has led the food and restaurant practice at Focal Point, which is a growing 60-person investment bank focused on M&A, capital raising, and debt restructuring. They're headquartered in LA, but also have offices in Chicago, New York, and Shanghai. They had a robust food practice in 2019 with 9 successful closings. He's a graduate of Harvard and the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And me, I'm the executive editor of Modern Restaurant Management, which is a B2B online magazine dealing with restaurant operations. We're your go-to person if you want to learn about grease trap maintenance or marketing for your restaurant. I'm also the host of a podcast called The Main Course, where we feature conversations with restaurant industry insiders. So welcome, everybody. Hope to have a great hour. And, as Pooja said, feel free to interact, engage with us, and ask any questions. So let's kind of do a little bit of wrap up of COVID, of what we're seeing so far. So how would you say coronavirus has impacted the following areas in beverage, food and beverage companies? How about deal flow and the deal environment? Bob, I guess this would be a good one for you.
Great, thank you, Barbara. At the start of COVID, there certainly was a slowdown in deal and transaction activity. As you can imagine, a lot of deals were put on hold. There's a lot of volatility and a lot of changes. I think we saw, starting in the second quarter and certainly into the third quarter, quite a rush to market or an increase in the activity, as a lot of companies realized there could well be a significant change in the tax laws as it related to capital gains. And so we saw a number of companies coming to market for that reason. I think we continue to see activity, and we certainly have a number of new pitches going on now. So I think next year will be active. There is certainly some pent-up supply. I think if there is a split Congress and more limited tax increases, that will certainly support additional deal activity. The healthy companies have come to the M&A market trying to take advantage, I think, of their benefits from COVID, the COVID surge. Certainly these would be more of the grocery, the parties supplying grocery. The increase in the top line and profitability this year has led to some interesting conversations around valuation, of course, and the impact of COVID, and arguments around the sustainability or lack thereof. We currently have a project in market now we're calling Project Boost. It's a shelf-stable beverage company that has done extremely well during COVID, as people have done a lot of stockpiling of products, and you've seen a big increase in food at home. We are seeing actually similar valuations to what we experienced pre-COVID for the healthy, strong companies. There is a lot of capital on the sidelines, private equity firms. We've seen some firms be very aggressive with terms and no financing contingencies and so on. The debt markets have loosened up from where they were early in COVID, and we've seen some pretty impressive leverage ratios. At the same time, there are a number of distressed deals taking place. There have been a number of bankruptcies in the restaurant space you referred to earlier, Barbara. There's been a number of them, CPK, Chuck E. Cheese, et cetera. And I think for a lot of these operators early on, they had PPP money, which extended their life a bit. But with that money drying up, a lot of them are faced with either a restructuring of their debt or a full bankruptcy. We're working on a couple of restaurants in bankruptcy, one very high profile, and actually some fitness gyms as well. We are seeing aggressive consolidators in the M&A world, both on the distressed side and the healthy side. There are folks who believe now is the time to take advantage of the situation. One high profile deal was Mars buying Kind, and then Kind immediately turned around and bought Nature's Bakery. So that's a consolidation play in the health and beauty area health and wellness area for Mars, which is obviously the maker of Snickers. But in general, there's lots of interest in the food space. Food is the ultimate essential. So I believe, there will continue to be a lot of M&A activity. And then lastly, I just want to mention, we have seen an increase in interest in companies that are somehow mission driven or focus on social impact. There are these impact funds that are out there now. And I think these companies are viewed as being favored by the consumers, especially younger consumers. So there is a lot of renewed interest or new interest in those types of companies.
With that capital that's on the sidelines, what do you think they will be looking to invest in 2021?
Well, I think it's going to be a continuation of what we've seen. That's going to be, the better for you, healthier food companies that offer some advantages. Immunity boost, for example, I think is going to continue to be relevant. So we definitely will see a continuation of that. Plant-based companies have grown in popularity. So I think it's, again, those companies that have a way to benefit from the continued work from home trends that we've seen. On the restaurant side, I think we've seen, a dichotomy between the quick service and fast casual players who have done quite well, and then the full service dining, which has obviously struggled for a lot of the reasons you mentioned earlier. And I think there will be selective interest in the full service, but continued strong interest in both quick service and fast casual.
So let's flip over to the operating environment, and we'll go to Don first. What have you been seeing, and what do you expect to see in 2021?
Barbara, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you guys having me on as a panelist. To kind of add on real briefly, just with respect to the economic outlook, just to kind of touch on what you had talked about at the very beginning, to bring it closer to home. I sat in a webinar. We had a presentation with the California Economic Development Authority the other day. They painted a little bit bleak statistics for California. And California does account for about 19% of all business closures in the United States, followed next by Texas at only 8%. And with respect to food service, the year-on-year loss for employment in the food service is down. It's down 28%, or about 104,000 job losses for year-on-year statistics, and that was up through last month. So it could actually get a little bit bleaker as well. And it's not even expected. It's expected that food service is projected to lose about 120,000 jobs through 2022, or about 22% that may not even come back. So while food service is looking a little bit bleak, it's not bleak at all aspects of the food industry. The food processing and food manufacturers are doing well, and especially if they're dealing in the retail industry. And what we're seeing quite a bit in the food processing and food manufacturing is investments that these companies are making in technology as well as automation. So for example, Tyson Food just recently invested more than $500 million in automation. And then if you look at the whole food chain, starting from the ag space, then to the distribution sector, as well as the groceries, there's a tremendous amount of automation and efficiency that the ag companies are using to replace labor for in many cases. So they're putting in automated robots to be able to pick some of the fruit off the trees to replace seasonal workers. And with respect to the distribution, we're seeing heavy investment in the area of automation and production, where companies are adding production lines. They're also adding, they're replacing traditional forklifts with auto drive forklifts. So those are some of the areas that we're seeing on the distribution side. And then we all see from the grocery stores change, we're seeing increased automation with respect to more self-checkout cashiers and different types of kiosks. Where we're seeing a lot of where we're also seeing through our food clients and food companies out there, companies obviously are pivoting, and they're pivoting through making improvements with cleaning, sanitation, disinfection of their facility, obviously, and for the protection of their own employees. We're all forced to do that. They're monitoring they're taking increased steps to monitor the temperatures of their employees. Where every company can boost efficiencies on the operation side is truly monitoring their costs, monitoring their processing costs through reduction of the utilities, whether it's electrical, whether it's refrigeration, whether it's water. We're also seeing companies do a better job in anticipating trends, where they may just produce where in the past they might have produced for everywhere or for everybody, and just have a tremendous amount of excess inventory on hand. That's not happening anymore. Companies are closely monitoring their operating trends and their operating dashboards and metrics. And then last, I wanted to touch on just a couple expenses that we're seeing with a lot of our clients and a lot of food companies out there. Is they're focusing on reduction of expenses, and those could be in the areas of labor reductions, commissions. They're not traveling to the trade shows. They're reducing the amount of promotions and some travel costs. And so while revenues may be stagnating a little bit, the reduction of expenses are resulting in companies having still big profit years. And I'm not sure if Bob's seeing that on the M&A sector, but we're seeing that for a lot of our clients on the food processing and the manufacturing side.
And just wanted to insert, in the restaurant side, technology has been a savior this year, and a lot of the same points that you were making about, the investments in hygiene and automation, and that restaurants that never were on the tech side before, or that looked at things and said, oh, this would be nice to have, but I don't know that my guests want it. Well, now your guests want it. Your guests want to pay at the table. They want to do these things. They want to know that they're safe in your environment. And the digital world of the restaurants is just going to keep continuing and continuing. When one of the funniest things is the tale of the QR codes. It was the big comeback kid where every restaurant was all of a sudden getting up and running with their menu and having it available to people on people's phones, and it made guests feel safe. So I'll throw it back to Bob. What are you kind of seeing in this environment that you can add into this part of the conversation?
Well, sure, and I think this conversation is pretty broad in terms of the full spectrum of food and the supply chain, and so it really has been a tale of two cities. We've had hundreds of conversations during COVID, and if you're speaking with, grocery suppliers, it's one conversation. If you're speaking with food service suppliers or operators, it's a whole different conversation. But I do think, as Don said, almost all these companies have pivoted. A lot of them have been forced to adapt, but we've seen essentially an acceleration in initiatives that they may have already been pursuing. You both talked about the technology implementation. There's been a lot of that, of course, but we've seen things in terms of revenue diversification, for example. Obviously, there are restaurants now doing fabulous in the takeout takeaway business they never had done before. We've seen a lot of food companies who are supplying the food service industry pivot towards meal kits and meal solutions, which at one point were almost a dying sector, and now all of them are exploding. So I think the companies have done a good job of pivoting. Some have had to implement new packaging. We have a client that was primarily focused on selling product into the bulk world, and with COVID and everything, they've shifted to a lot more packaged products. So again, I think when you have a crisis like this, companies are creative and have shown that they've got some staying power and ability to shift. And as Don said, in some cases, they're doing very, very well from a profitability standpoint. I will say in the grocery, it's not that I think rising tides has risen all ships, lifted all ships. There are some good quality branded companies that have struggled with the grocer challenge of keeping up with consumer demand, and I think there's been a lot more SKU focus as the grocers do try to address specific demand. As I understand, a lot of the resets in different categories have been postponed or thrown off. So it hasn't been easy going even for some of the grocery suppliers to get heard and get their products on the shelves. But again, I think most have adapted well, finding either, again, alternative markets, alternative customers. And in many cases, they've turned on the direct-to-consumer spigot in a big way that they maybe didn't have before. So again, a lot of creativity we've seen out there and a lot of companies adapting. Some, the headwinds for full service dining and so on are so significant that it's still a major struggle. But we've certainly been impressed with how people have adapted.
And what's interesting, Bob, that you make that comment, because I think that you're seeing a lot of the changes that will be long-term in nature. I don't think that these shifts will be just short-term and then they just go back to where it was. I think that many companies are finding that some of these changes will better their company in the long run.
Yeah,
Clearly.
If they work, they're going to put them in place. And if
Yeah.
they save money, particularly using a technology that is going to be very guest centric, or the grocery services, Instacart and all of these things that were just ballooning this year, those are going to stay in place, if only for the convenience factor of all of these things. But I think, pivot, adaptability, innovation, creativity, that is what everybody in the industry has been doing all year. Those are kind of the buzzwords of the year. So let's flip to Pooja and all of the legal issues that have been going on this year. And it always seems that there was one legal headache and another legal headache, and dealing with things with municipalities and outdoor dining, and can we do to-go cocktails, and all of this, kind of the innovation that was coming out of necessity. So what is, I guess, what was going on legally and in the regulatory landscape, and what do you see are going to be factors? Obviously, you're in LA. There's been a lot of stuff the recent days over outdoor dining. I'm in New Jersey, but just outside of New York City, and we're talking about closing indoor dining next week. So what are you seeing? What are you hearing from your clients that are their pain points?
So I think the number one thing I'm seeing in terms of the health orders is confusion. That's been the case since March, and it continues to be the case. And I think that's because, at least in the restaurant and even in the retail space, people are being governed by federal laws and regulations, by state laws and regulations, and at the local, county, and city level. And sometimes those regulations are inconsistent. And that's especially true for employees. And that's employees at all levels, both on the restaurant side and the food processing and manufacturing side, understanding what requirements you need to do to maintain a safe work environment, and what employees are entitled to under state and federal law in terms of sick leave and in terms of the reporting for COVID. And those have changed. The state of California has been very active in kind of trying to regulate things, but also changing these laws, not just for the shutdown, but in terms of what responsibilities companies have to their employees. So there's been a lot of confusion, but there's also been cooperation in terms of letting go of some of the more restrictive and rigid aspects of permitting. I think we'll see that as a nationwide trend of outdoor dining, of additional sidewalk spaces, and streamlining the process, because all restaurateurs, especially in the LA area, know that sometimes you can wait. There's been unreasonable waits for permit or waits for permissions for certain aspects. And now that the cities and counties have shown that you can streamline those processes and you can approve outdoor dining or open certain parking spaces and parklets, I think there's a strong demand to have that continue on. And also, there's been such an increased importance and stream of profit directed to third-party delivery services. We saw that with the DoorDash IPO just now, and that's caused an increased scrutiny on what those services are charging restaurants and how companies are being listed, how restaurants are listed on third-party delivery services. I think that's going to continue, and I think that scrutiny will probably increase to delivery services that are also focused on grocery. And we also had in California, which I think will affect everyone, we had the Prop 22 fight over independent contractors versus employees that was won essentially by Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash. And I think we can see those effects now. So I think there's a push and pull with the third-party delivery services. Now it's front and center how important they are, right? They're a very, very important piece of the food and beverage space, and I think that's going to continue. But I think at the state and city level, there's been efforts to try to limit the fees that could be capped, and to have some restrictions as to when you can list restaurants. California passed the Fair Food Delivery Act a couple of months ago, and I think there's talk of doing that on a more concerted federal level. So I think that that's a trend. And then the last thing I'll say is that essentially the courts are pretty backed up right now. So if you had a case or a contract dispute or even a partnership dispute that was in litigation, companies are starting to figure out that their case may not be going to the court next year. A lot of my cases are now set to 2022 at the earliest, and I think that is causing people to look at arbitration or to consider settlement discussions or to try to negotiate rather than using courts in a way that they might have used previously. So that's what I've been seeing, and I think that's what we'll continue to see for a while.
I'll give you a great example. I was speaking with people at Clean Juice yesterday. They did not use third-party delivery in 2019. In 2020, it's been over 11% of their business, accounting for $4 million in sales. And they do not think that's going to be slowing down. So that just shows you how big that it is. Obviously, today's IPO for DoorDash also is kind of showing, the interest in food delivery that is out there now. So let's talk a little bit about alcohol delivery. And alcohol, and I think there's been a lot of confusion too on that side where, alcohol is always a good profit center for restaurants. So what do you see as the legal issues moving forward with to-go cocktails or even alcohol delivery that restaurants should know about?
Well, I think that the trend is to continue to allow some version of to-go as almost a form of restaurant relief, given that federal relief has been, the Restaurants Act has been in the works for a while. We've seen a lot of bipartisan support for that bill, but it's still kind of sitting there as part of the past stimulus bill that's going nowhere. And I think that there's a frustration that there hasn't been concentrated federal relief, and a push towards allowing increased alcohol sales for restaurants, and in general loosening alcohol delivery restrictions, I think is what we're going to see in the future. In most cases, I think the cities and states that have loosened restrictions have done it on a temporary basis rather than a permanent basis. But I think given the struggles of the industry, it's likely that they're going to, when legislative sessions reconvene, that they'll reconsider and either extend out the deadlines for those restrictions, for lifting those restrictions, or just lift or make those permanent changes.
Somebody had something to add?
I was just trying to chime in on the DoorDash offering. If my research is right, their valuation of well into the 30 billion range is more than every restaurant chain other than, I believe, McDonald's, Starbucks, Yum, and maybe Chipotle, if I understand. But it just goes to your point of the growth of the third-party delivery.
So let's flip more to PPP. There's been so much confusion. It started out as this great savior, and we're going to help the little guy and we're going to help the restaurants. But as the information trickles out as to some of the players who received money, and franchises on some level, you can talk about individual franchisees who are small businesses within their communities and are just as deserving of PPP as is a small business. It may have, the original intention may have been small businesses, in more indie restaurants. But where does this fit in, and what do restaurants and food service companies, need to know about PPP forgiveness? And as this is going on, we thought that it was going to be a couple of months, and there were different restrictions going on. But what do they need to know, and how is it going to affect them you know, with their taxes and all of this financial information that, you know, they're trying to deal with all these other things, and now they're going to have to deal with taxes at some point on all of this. So Don, what's your take on the PPP program?
So I'll touch on this a little bit. So with respect to the PPP, I will tell you that for most companies out there, most of our clients and most food companies have been able to take advantage of the PPP program and have helped tremendously. However, in many cases, it's just not enough. And who knows what's going to happen. We were hoping for a relief package that would be in sight any day now. We don't know if there's a second round. That's frequently a question that we get. Will there be another round of PPP funding? We just don't know. From a tax standpoint, you know, when PPP comes out, everybody was all excited. And then the rulings came out that PPP, if you do get the loan forgiven, then that's not considered taxable income if it's forgiven. So everybody was all excited about that. So then the IRS has come up and they've issued guidance declaring their position that expenses that were paid and are in connection with the PPP funds are also non-deductible for federal purposes. So not only is so while the income is not taxable, the expenses are not deductible as well. The government's saying, hey, we don't want you to have a double whammy on that. So currently the IRS has issued that guidance that all those expenses are not deductible. There's a lot of companies out there that don't know that are intending to continue on to deduct those payroll related or payroll expenses or payroll related expenses on their corporate tax return. But not only has the federal government said, no, you can't do that, but the California Franchise Tax Board has taken the same position. There's also been some questions that, oh, maybe what I'll do, or a company saying maybe what we'll do is that we'll wait until next year until we get the government to, or the SBA to approve our forgiveness, and we'll deduct those expenses in 2020. Well, the IRS said that's not allowed either. So those expenses related to the PPP will not be deductible for IRS, for federal, as well as state purposes. But then all of a sudden, 2 days ago, there was some discussion, and there's been there's been some rumbling out in the street, and it hasn't been finalized yet, but there may be a situation where Congress may change their mind that really wasn't their intention. Their intention was that they wanted to have those expenses deductible as well. It's now we're kind of at a wait and see period for all companies. But for right now, those expenses in connection with the PPP loan are not deductible. And I encourage all companies out there, food companies out there, or restaurants that have received funding, just make sure that they talk to their tax practitioner about whether those expenses are deductible or not. And then the other thing that's out there with unrelated to PPP, but exists now for tax, and we'll talk about under the Biden administration in a couple minutes, but with respect to those companies that are making the heavy investment in production equipment or automation, those expenses are 100% deductible. It's considered 100% bonus depreciation. Companies should be able to take advantage of that now. There is a sunsetting provision through 2022, and then it will reduce 20% a year. But if you're planning to do it now, or if you've already made the investment in equipment, please keep in mind that those are 100% deductible expenses in the current year.
So let's talk about trends. It's the end of the year. Always a good time to look forward and see what we're expecting. So Pooja, we've mentioned the Restaurants Act a little bit before, but where does it stand? What are your thoughts on, what kind of relief is ahead for restaurants? There's a lot of players who are, in the mix asking for all different kinds of levels of help. So, where do you think this is going to play out?
So the Restaurants Act, I think, has enough support that it's going to be a major, that I'd be surprised if some version of the Restaurants Act doesn't pass next year. In terms of other relief, another big thing that everyone is asking about is eviction relief, rent relief, and a potential eviction moratorium. Different states have discussed that, and it's really at the county level, but I don't see necessarily a large scale. I think that will continue to be on a state by state, county by county level. But I think as the PPP funds are kind of drying up, restaurants and other companies that were really relying on that PPP money to kind of keep going and maintain their payroll are going to be in a situation where they can't pay their rent. And I think that's I can't predict really which way that's going to roll out. And I think it will depend based on the composition of, the counties and the states. In terms of other relief, I think we're going to continue to see a push for outdoor dining. I think there'll continue to be support in terms of pivoting to delivery, but I think the focus really of the restaurant lobbying groups and the industry advocacy is really on getting the bipartisan Restaurants Act relief passed. And I think there's enough support right now. The issue is that it was put into the Democrat larger stimulus bill, and I think that that created an issue of it kind of getting stuck there. But I think there's enough support for some version of that we'll see it go ahead. I do think that going forward, we might see harder, more employee-friendly regulations that will affect businesses. We saw an increase in the minimum wage in Florida. I think that that's a trend that's likely to continue. And I think that there are initiatives to provide relief to restaurant workers and other workers on kind of an individual level. And I think that will continue as well.
Great. Other trends that we're seeing, I know on the restaurant side, this has been a year of where everything kind of flipped, where comfort food is the norm and everybody is eating chicken sandwiches and French fries. But in the next year, as hopefully the vaccines are available and people are venturing out, and what is on the horizon, or that you're seeing in terms of deals and the environment that people are looking forward to in 2021 that didn't happen in 2020? Yes, Bob, this may be a good one for you.
Yeah. Well, specifically on the restaurant side, there is hope, obviously, with vaccines, and it seems like we've been, just around the corner for a while here. I think most operators, though, are realistic and appreciate that, the regulatory shutdowns are there. Consumer habits are not going to change necessarily overnight. So I think, as we said earlier, they continue to adapt and morph and develop better programs, for takeaway and that type of thing. But most of the operators I talk to are really thinking 2022 is going to be the time frame, and some are even saying 2023. But it's going to be the time frame before things normalize. So I think from a deal standpoint, there are investors in restaurants. There are some who view this as the right time to be investing, because whenever it does normalize, there are going to be fewer seats. There is going to be less competition for the consumer, less competition for labor, less competition for real estate. So they're out there, but I think they're selective and being cautious, as you can imagine, in this environment. Certainly the quick service, fast casual side continues to be of interest to folks. But I think the full service, is still a ways off. I certainly keep my fingers crossed on a new stimulus program, which hopefully will be forthcoming. That's one piece of news we're still waiting on, because as somebody mentioned, you know, the restaurants need help with landlords and keeping their employees, the staff together. So hopefully that'll be forthcoming.
Let's talk a little bit about ghost kitchens, virtual brands. A lot of interest in that as a business model moving forward. You know, I just picked off a list of names of people who are expanding via virtual kitchens: Grimaldi's, Famous Dave's, Aloha Poke, Muscle Maker Grill, Wendy's, and even celebrities are getting in on the mix. Mariah Carey is just doing a virtual cookie brand. So how does this affect this trend? Kind of, is more money going to be thrown at these virtual brands that can kind of ramp up really quickly and you know, and pretty efficiently in terms of the finances?
Sure, I think ghost kitchens were a great idea, and it really is a way to create density of orders, density of delivery routes. Because one of the problems, I think, with the delivery model before is if you don't have that density, the cost of the delivery is very high. I think all of us have experienced that when we've, you know, received our delivered goods at home and can't believe how much we're paying for the delivery. I think ghost kitchens have a good shot at reducing that delivery cost because they're going to have such density of delivery routes. But that does mean that, you know, the location of these kitchens are important, and they've got to have, you know, a proximity to the consumer and that density I mentioned. The economics don't work too well otherwise, is my sense of things. The other phenomenon that's more of a short-term thing is what they're calling host kitchens, where underutilized kitchens at restaurant chains are being you know, repositioned to provide, you know, a virtual solution to certain brands, as you say. That I think is more of a short-term phenomenon to take advantage of a lot of excess capacity in the kitchens today. But certainly, you know, ghost kitchens are consistent with folks' desire to get food delivered and hopefully, you know, reduce that delivery cost over time.
So Don, what are some of the things that you anticipate will be a trend that will affect the food and beverage in 2021?
Well, I think by far and away the biggest and most exciting trend, and it's something that's been going on for some time, is the increase in plant-based foods. Bob mentioned it earlier, and I couldn't agree more. You know, 88% of people now are eating at home, and most of those people, I can't tell you whether it's 80 whatever percent, but well over 20% or 30% want to eat healthy. And I think that we're seeing an explosion of plant-based foods. If you look at the plant-based future, and you look at that particular area, the 5 largest food companies in the world have dove into plant-based foods in some way, shape, or form. If you look at Pepsi, Tyson, Nestle, JBS, and Kraft, they've either acquired accelerators that are based on plant-based foods, or they've invested in other types of plant-based lines. It's just an explosion that's, I don't believe, is going away anytime soon. And it's huge. I mean, plant-based milk products, if you look at whether it's oat milk or almond milk, it's 14% of all retail milk sales, and that's huge. And it's not as large on the meat side. It's only 2%. But I will tell you that it's growing and growing. What's interesting, and I heard this on a webinar that last week at Houlihan Lokey, and this one it resonated with me, where they indicated that the outlook of the plant-based arena is huge and it's positive, but there are barriers that all of us have. So, for example, prices are still a problem. People 70% of people are not willing to spend more for plant-based proteins than they are for regular protein. And currently, plant-based proteins are more expensive. And the next thing that they talked about was the quality of the food. People still need and still think of plant-based food, and they have to get over the perception that the flavor of plant-based food is still dry and the aftertaste is really strong. And 70% of consumers, US consumers, believe that that taste is the most important feature of plant-based foods. So that's something that we have to get over. And the texture, in some cases, and we've all had plant-based food, the texture is too uniform and that there's a lack of options. But I will tell you that I couldn't be more excited about the future of plant-based products. I do not see it as a short-term fix. I think it's going to get, if anything, it's going larger, and it'll be a larger and larger component of our diet.
And jumping off of that, with regard to the plant-based foods, I agree with Dawn that I think it's a trend that's really unstoppable. But on the legal side, there's a lot of challenges that I think we will be seeing going through the courts in 2021 and probably wrapping up in 2022, because definitely not in California, but several states in the Midwest have passed laws that require, certain disclaimers or identifiers are designed to prevent plant-based companies from using words like meat or milk. And those challenges are, the ACLU is shepherding a lot of the First Amendment challenges to those laws, but because of kind of the delays in the courts, we still haven't seen those go through. And I think there's a couple of cases that may go up to the Supreme Court either next year or the year after. So I think that's, from a legal perspective, that certain states are trying to regulate this trend in order to protect other industries that are kind of affected is really interesting to watch. It's definitely not something that we deal with in California, but we'll be, I think you'll be seeing a lot of those cases come to conclusion in the next year.
I'm seeing also a big trend as far as increase the surge of meal kits. Are you guys seeing that as well? I mean, they've grown significantly before COVID and before the pandemic. It was kind of, it was slowing down. It was slowing down considerably. And all of a sudden COVID hits and the meal kit surges are taking off. And there are more newcomers than I've ever seen before entering the market. And specifically, and if you look at the meal kits in the market, most of them, I mean, whether it's HelloFresh or Home Chef or Freshly or Blue Apron, many of those are offering their keto diet, the paleo diet, vegetarian, or all plant-based diets. Are you guys seeing that as well?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was kind of a novelty before. People tried them out and then, they would just fall by the wayside. But yeah, with people being home and wanting to eat healthy, and not wanting to go out to the supermarkets, there are so many different factors that grew this year. Also, we're seeing people who are getting into it, restaurants are getting into it, where they may be, have a special lasagna and they're going to give you the different ingredients that you can put it together at home, and they're kind of being able to build loyalty that way and post videos and show people how to make things. So it's kind of been a good boon for kind of everybody around there. And definitely with the plant-based, everything that you're saying, I can't tell you how much news I get on a daily basis that's some kind of plant-based, that it's not a trend. It is here to stay. And Burger King was great when what they did with the get the burger and get the Impossible Burger and try them out for yourselves. I think that campaign was great about building awareness, because you could just try it and see what happened, and it brought it to consumers who may not have wanted to even try them before. It was kind of a no-brainer. So let's move on to 2021. We're going to have a new president, a new administration. So how do you feel the Biden administration will impact food and beverage in 2021 and moving forward? Who wants to go? Bob first?
Well, I can certainly go first. I don't have the depth of knowledge of Pooja on the legal side, but I know there are a number of areas of hope that people have, including, as I mentioned, the stimulus. I think if it doesn't get done before then, I think it'll get done shortly thereafter. I do think there are concerns about potential tax increases, although with a divided Congress, I think that will take time. Certainly these runoffs in Georgia will be a determinant there. I do think there is a chance for more regulations. You know, we're personally, I'm in California, which I have a lot of food companies that do complain about the regulations already. So to the extent there's any more, you know, that's not great. And then, you know, there could well be additional costs of labor coming out of the administration. So there definitely are some hopes, but also some concerns about the new administration.
Don, how do you feel it's going to, we heard a lot about tariffs and particularly with the restaurant industry and wine and all kinds of things. What are your take on, how a Biden administration is going to, affect taxes and minimum wage and all of these things?
Well, I agree with Bob. I think what's happening with the slimmest of margins, I think you'll see that with Congress after January. I don't know what the results are going to be, but if a tax increase or a tax bill, an economic bill does go into place, it's likely to go into place probably the tail end of 2021. And then it may not be retroactive to the beginning of 21. It'll probably start in 2022. And with respect to taxes, you may be looking at, on the corporate side, where currently it's 21%, you probably are looking at maybe an increase to 28% for corporate rates. Individual rates may go up to the highest rates of 39%. And then capital gains, there's discussions of eliminating capital gains and putting that up to the ordinary income rate. A couple of the areas that I see is potentially an environment that's a little bit kinder, or a rollback of tariffs on the Chinese with respect to goods. And that'll clear the way for even more shipments of U.S. products overseas. On the ag side, with respect to food companies, I think you're going to see a little bit more heavier government involvement and intervention, and Pooja could probably talk to this as well. But I think you're going to see more intervention with respect to, and more transparency with labeling on food. You'll see more cleaner, more smart labeling, more transparency. So I think that you'll see more government involvement on that. I couldn't agree more with Pooja earlier. I think that you're going to see the goal, and it was put out on Biden's website, the Build Back Better, with the push to increase minimum wage up to $15 an hour. I think we're for sure going to see that. What impact they may have on restaurants, I think it's going to be tough on company owners, on restaurant owners, to deal with labor, if minimum wage is increased to that extent.
Pooja, let's talk about the legal. What do you think the legal implications of a Biden administration?
Sure, I'll talk about a couple of different points. So first, on labor, I think we're going to see kind of an immediate flip-flop on labor. We had a Department of Labor that reversed almost all of the, especially on tip pooling, joint employment, and minimum wage, that was kind of very employer friendly, and that's been the environment for the past 4 years. I think we're going to immediately flip back, and so we'll see, I think, a return to the Obama era policies on tip pooling and joint employment. With regard to the FDA, I do think that the current FDA has put a lot of money into the food safety modernization plan, and I think the Biden administration will actually continue that and probably increase some of those regulations. But there is going to be an increase that's already kind of starting now, but on tracing food throughout the process and on having a more modern food safety system rather than kind of relying on the past infrastructure. I think that'll continue. The FTC just put into place Made in USA labeling rules, and I think we've seen just a huge surge in false advertising cases regarding food labeling. I think the FTC will probably get more, continue to be involved with that. And we've seen even during COVID with regard to nutritional and supplement companies, about 330 warning letters that this FTC has already issued. I think that will continue, and there will be a consumer focus from the FTC. And I also think with regard to privacy that we will see some kind of initiative, and that I think depends on if we have a divided Congress or not. But California has just passed increased privacy protections for consumers that we may see being implemented or some kind of push to implementation on the federal level.
So we have a few questions from the audience. First question is, are the prospects for coffee/fast breakfast establishments chains brighter than full service? And I know I could say, yeah, at this point, we're definitely seeing, more of an interest. The coffee has kind of flipped a little bit. Dunkin' has seen that that it's gone later in the day. They're seeing more in their specialty beverages. We're seeing not necessarily breakfast out or breakfast on the go at the moment, but people are ordering coffee. And you would think that they wouldn't. You would say they would have it at home, but there still is something about, particularly the specialty beverages that you're not going to have at home that is a treat, and that's something that people are desiring right at the moment.
I was just going to add that I think coffee is an area that people still enjoy the fresh cup. It doesn't lend itself as well to e-commerce and getting delivered. I think that's why there's a group out of Europe called JAB that bought up almost every major coffee company. I think that was part of their logic, that it's not going to be made obsolete by e-commerce. I do think the breakfast side, though, is a little more questionable, because I do think people are eating breakfast more at home as they work from home than when they were going out to their office.
So I have a question for Don. Very timely. What are some tax moves that a food company owner should consider before the year end?
Definitely purchase, if you have it on your horizon, to purchase some large equipment. And I touched on this a little bit earlier. Definitely purchase as much equipment as you can to get the 100% deduction on the 100% deduction, or the bonus depreciation that will start phasing out in the next couple of years, especially if it was in your budget before, let's say in January. Go ahead and accelerate that through December if you can get those pieces of equipment in. That's probably the biggest one. That'll offset the hurt of, unfortunately, having the non-deductibility of the PPP expenses. Also, if it's in your plan, where at first, right when COVID hit, that there was a plan to bonus some employees, and then all of a sudden that went away. But some of these employees were working hard during the COVID, or came in and gave it their all, and you are planning to bonus your employees or to provide some type of bonus, it would be a good idea to do that towards the tail end, pretty much assuming that you've received, if you've already received, especially if you've already received forgiveness on your PPP loans.
So following up on some of the plant-based food questions, someone wanted to know if there's any indication or mention of lab-based meats, the cultured meats coming into the marketplace, and how do you think they can compete with the regular meat and plant-based meats that are already in place? Anybody?
I'll take a stab at it, and that is, you've got to be somewhat careful if people are looking for a holistic and a healthier food option, lab-based meat may not be the healthiest option. And I'm not saying stay away from it, but you've got to look into your plant-based products. They may not be the healthiest for you. If you're looking at plant-based items for that it's good for the environment and will lessen the greenhouse gases, that's a great way to dive into plant-based products. But double check to see if they're the healthiest choice for you.
And we'll end on a question for Bob. What are you seeing in food company valuations and sell side trends?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, I think for the right company, the healthy company, we're seeing valuations that are very similar to pre-COVID levels. There is a lot of capital out there. Food is a strong essential in the view of most investors. So we are seeing strong valuations. I think there are a lot of companies, though, that aren't so healthy and do have stories and complications, and those valuations are certainly much softer. But no, I think the valuations are strong for most companies, and the sell side trends have picked up. As I mentioned, in some cases it was trying to beat any change in the tax rates, but we're seeing strong activity. We have quite a few pitches in the works right now, so strong activity going into next year.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to throw this back to Pooja to close us out.
Thank you everyone for attending. If you have questions that we didn't get to answer, feel free to email us, and we will be sending something out this week from all the panelists. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on this webinar, and thank you Barbara, Dawn, and Bob, for a great panel.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was our pleasure.
Thanks.